Vivid verses.
I've always believed that a man's clearest moments come not in triumph, but in the quiet before he makes a decision he knows will cost him something. This is one of those moments. The city of Caldwell Heights sits in a narrow valley between two ridgelines, the kind of place that feels both hidden and inevitable, like a secret someone keeps telling. I moved here 3 years ago from the coast when Arrowwood Capital offered me a position that was less an offer and more an inevitability. The kind of role that finds you when you've spent enough years building the right reputation in the right rooms. Portfolio analysis, primarily. I look at things other people can't quite see and find the pattern underneath. It's a useful skill. It translates well beyond finance. My apartment is on the 14th floor of the Caldwell Spire building on Hardgrove Street, a converted industrial tower that someone with taste and a serious budget had reimagined in the early 2000s. Exposed brick, wide windows, ceilings high enough to think in. I'd furnished it simply, a deep charcoal sectional, a dining table in raw walnut, bookshelves that covered the east wall from floor to ceiling. I don't accumulate things. I accumulate clarity. My name is Raymond Cole. I'm 34 years old. I run 5 miles every morning before the city properly wakes up. I cook my own meals 4 nights out of 7, and I read more than most people I know. I'm not telling you this to impress anyone. I'm telling you because it matters for understanding what comes later. Understanding that I am not a man who drifts or reacts without thought or confuses noise for signal. I met Cassandra Vale at a dinner party hosted by my colleague Owen Marsh at his townhouse on Belhaven Terrace. Owen throws these gatherings about once a month, 8 to 12 people, good wine, conversation that actually goes somewhere. I've been to 5 or 6 of them. The format is always the same. Everyone brings something, someone brings someone new, and by the end of the night, you've either made a connection you'll remember or you haven't. That night, I remembered. Cassandra was a landscape architect who'd recently moved to Caldwell Heights to oversee a major redesign of the Northgate Civic Park corridor. She was tall, dark-haired, with a quality of attention that felt rare in a world of people performing, listening rather than actually doing it. When she talked, she was precise. When she listened, she was fully there. We spent most of the evening in a corner near Owen's bookshelves, debating whether cities should be designed for the people who already live in them or for the people who might, and she had a position she could defend with both passion and evidence. I found that magnetic. We exchanged numbers at the end of the night. She texted first the following morning. I respected that. The first 2 months were easy in the way that things are easy when they're new and both people are showing their best selves. Not falsely, just selectively. We went to dinner at Bellows, a small Basque restaurant on the east side of downtown that I've been going to for 2 years. We walked the lake path at Cartwright Reserve on a Sunday when the light was low and gold and the water was perfectly still. We cooked together in her apartment, which was smaller than mine, but had better light, and she made a lamb dish from her grandmother's recipe that I told her I was already planning the next occasion to request it. She was, in those months, consistent. Warm in the ways I'd come to expect, funny in the specific dry way that I appreciated, and clear about what she wanted from the relationship. She'd had a long-term partnership end badly 2 years prior. She told me about it plainly, without drama, which I also respected. She wanted something real, she said. Something steady. I told her I wanted the same thing. I meant it. The first sign was so small that I almost cataloged it as noise. We were at Bellows again, the second visit, a Saturday in late autumn. I made a joke, the same joke, more or less, that I'd made at Owen's dinner party, the one about urban planners who design parks for the award photos rather than for the people who'll actually sit in them. At Owen's, she'd laughed. Properly laughed, the kind that crinkles the eyes. That night at Bellows, she looked at me with something flat in her expression and said, "That's a bit cynical, don't you think?" I noted it. I didn't react to it. I changed the direction of the conversation easily, and the rest of the evening was fine. That's the kind of thing you can write off once. Everyone has off nights. A comment can land differently depending on what happened before you walk through the door. I know that. I'm not interested in expecting someone to be a perfect machine, but I filed it. That's what I do. December arrived, and the relationship deepened the way good things do when they're given enough time and honesty. She met two of my closest friends, Ren Ashford, who I'd known since university, and Carter Bright, who I'd met through Arrowwood and who I'd trust with anything. They liked her. Ren said she had good bones, which was his way of saying she was the kind of person whose quality doesn't require much demonstration. Carter said she was clearly smart and that I seemed different around her in a good way. I heard both of those things, and I kept them. The holidays were warm. She spent Christmas with her family in the coastal city of Arran Bay, and I spent it with mine in the town of Ashford Crossing, where I grew up. We texted throughout, spoke on the phone twice, and she said something in those calls, something about looking forward to building more shared traditions that I turned over in my mind for a long time afterward. It felt like a real thing, a genuine reach toward a future. I was building something here. I knew it. I was clear-eyed about it, and I wanted it. The second month of the new year was when the inconsistency began to accumulate past the point of noise. It was a Thursday evening in February. I'd cooked dinner in my apartment, the lamb dish, actually because she'd mentioned the week before that she'd been thinking about it. I found a butcher on the west side of the city, a place called Harker & Sons, who had the cut I needed. I'd spent 2 hours on it, not to impress her, because I wanted the evening to be good. She arrived 40 minutes later than we'd planned. No message until she was actually at the door. I kept the food warm. I hadn't made anything of it. When she came in, she was quiet in a way that wasn't quite distant, but wasn't quite present either. She ate. She thanked me for the food, and when I reached across the table and put my hand over hers, the same gesture I'd made a dozen times before, a gesture she'd always responded to by turning her hand over and lacing her fingers through mine. She pulled back. Not sharply, just away. "I'm tired," she said. "I just need some space tonight." Fine. People need space. That's real and legitimate. I didn't make it about me. I gave her space. The evening wound down gently, and she left with a kiss that felt present enough that I didn't think much more about it. The following Monday, she called me in the middle of the day, which was unusual. Not wrong, just unusual. "Are you busy tonight?" she asked. "I can make the evening work," I said. "Come over. I want you close. I've been missing you." I went over. She was warm, open, affectionate in the way she had been in those early weeks. She wanted to sit close on the couch and watch something and just be near each other. That was exactly what the Thursday felt like it was rejecting and exactly what the Monday was requesting. I noted the gap between them. I didn't say anything yet because a gap between a Thursday and a Monday is not, by itself, a pattern. I want to be precise about what I mean when I say inconsistency, because I am aware that people contain multitudes and that no one is a single, fixed thing. I have never expected constancy to mean sameness. Moods exist. Circumstances change. Life intervenes. A relationship that couldn't absorb the natural fluctuation of two human beings living their actual lives wouldn't be worth having. What I'm describing is something different. The pattern that began to emerge over the following 6 weeks was not the ordinary ebb and flow of two people navigating closeness. It was a specific structure in which the same inputs produced wildly different outputs, depending on a variable I couldn't identify or predict. The joke that made her laugh became the joke that irritated her. Not once, but repeatedly. I would notice something had been funny to her, I would reference it again in a similar context, and I would get a cold look that made me feel as though I'd misread the whole previous interaction. The affection she'd asked for on Monday was, by Wednesday of the same week, a bit much. When I gave her more space in response, she asked why I seemed distant. I began keeping a mental log, not obsessively, just the way I track anything where patterns matter, noting the data points, watching for the shape underneath. One Saturday in March, we were at a dinner party at the home of her colleague Priya Sundaram, a landscape ecologist who lived in a beautifully restored Victorian on the north side of the city. Medium-sized gathering, 10 or 11 people, good food, the kind of evening where conversations split and merge and you find yourself talking to someone unexpected. I'd spent the first half of the evening talking to Priya's husband, a structural engineer named Tom, who had strong opinions about urban water management that I found genuinely interesting. Cassandra had been across the room in a conversation of her own. When we came back together toward the end of the evening, she was pleasant, connected, the version of her I'd fallen into this thing with. In the car on the way home, she reached over and held my hand while I drove and talked about how she'd enjoyed the night. It was exactly the kind of evening I'd have described in those first months as defining what I wanted the relationship to feel like. The following week, on a Wednesday, I suggested we go back to Bellows on the weekend. She said yes. On Friday, when I confirmed, she said she was tired and wasn't sure she wanted to be around people. We can do something quieter, I offered. Cook at home, either place. You're doing the thing where you try to fix everything, she said. I let a moment pass before I said anything. I wasn't aware I was trying to fix something. You said you were tired. I was suggesting an alternative. It feels like pressure. I looked at her across the room. We were at her apartment, and I thought, this is not a disagreement about dinner. This is something else entirely. The question is what? I didn't push it. I said, all right, let's leave the weekend open. We don't have to plan. I kept my voice level, and I meant what I said. She seemed to relax. The rest of the evening was fine. But I drove home that night, turning something over in my mind that I hadn't wanted to acknowledge yet. Here is what I knew. As of March, I was smart enough to recognize when I was adapting. It's not a weakness to adapt. Reading a room, adjusting your register, being attuned to the person you're with. That's not people-pleasing. That's basic interpersonal intelligence. I'd always done it. It had served me. But I was beginning to notice that my adaptations weren't working, and that was the signal worth paying attention to. Because in most systems, if an adaptation doesn't work, you gather more data, refine your read, try a better calibrated response. The feedback loop is useful. The feedback loop here had no consistent logic to it. I'm not describing a woman who was complicated or who had depths I hadn't reached yet, or who needed more patience or more time. I'm describing a situation in which the same behavior, the same words, the same gestures, the same quality of presence, produced one outcome on Tuesday and the opposite on Thursday, and I could not, no matter how carefully I observed, find the underlying variable that explained the difference. And the thing about walking on eggshells, the actual thing, the core of it, is that it's not about the eggs. It's about the ground. It's about the fact that you can't trust the surface beneath you. I had been in relationships before that ended for legitimate reasons. Incompatibility, bad timing, different directions. I'd never been in one where I felt like I was constantly recalculating my own behavior in real time based on a rulebook that rewrote itself overnight. I decided to test my read once more before I decided anything. The opportunity came in early April at an intimate dinner at Wren Ashford's place in the Crestwood neighborhood. Just 6 of us, a standing tradition Run had maintained for years. His apartment was warm and familiar to me. Books everywhere, a long dining table that he'd made himself from reclaimed gymnasium flooring. Cassandra had met Wren before, and they'd gotten along. He liked her. She liked him. This wasn't hostile territory. I was intentional that night, not in a manipulative way. I wasn't running an experiment with her as an unknowing subject. I was simply paying close attention, the way I pay close attention to anything that matters to me. The evening was good. The conversation was easy and ranging, the way it always was at Ren's. Cassandra was relaxed and funny. At one point, she made a comment about a project she was overseeing, something about a contractor who'd submitted plans that technically met every specification but clearly hadn't been thought through by anyone who'd ever actually sat outside. And the table laughed, and I caught her eye and smiled, and she smiled back in a way that felt entirely open. After dinner, in the kitchen while we were helping Ren with the dishes, I made a passing comment, quiet, just between us, about how much I'd enjoyed the evening. I touched the small of her back briefly, the way I'd done dozens of times. She leaned into it. She seemed content. In the car home, I decided to say what had been building for weeks. I want to talk about something, I said. Not heavy, not accusatory, just honest. She looked over at me. Okay, I've been noticing something, I said, and I want to put it on the table because I'd rather deal with it directly than let it sit. She waited. There are moments between us that work well, like tonight, and I'm not discounting those. But there's been a pattern that I can't quite reconcile, where the same thing, the same gesture, the same kind of comment, the same level of closeness, lands completely differently depending on the day. Something that was right on Monday is wrong on Wednesday. Affection you wanted last week feels like too much this week. A joke that made you laugh once becomes a source of irritation when I reference it again. I kept my voice calm and even. I wasn't delivering a verdict. I was describing what I'd seen. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I don't know what you mean. I think you do, I said, not unkindly. I'm not saying you're doing it on purpose. I'm saying I've noticed it, and it makes it very hard to know how to be with you. I just have moods, she said. Everyone has moods. I know that, I said. This isn't about moods. This is about the same action producing opposite responses, depending on something I can't see or predict. That's different. She was quiet again, and this time the quiet had a different texture. Not thinking. Closed. You're being analytical about something that isn't a math problem, she said. I'm describing an experience, I said. Not running a calculation. It feels like you're cataloging things I do wrong. That's a deflection. She moved from the substance to the feeling of being observed. That's not the same as addressing what I said. I'm not cataloging things you do wrong, I said. I'm telling you that I feel like I'm walking on eggshells. And I don't think that's healthy for either of us. She looked out the window. After a moment, she said, Maybe I've been stressed. That might be true, I said, and I want to know about that if it were. But this isn't new. This has been the pattern for months. We drove the rest of the way to her apartment in a quiet that wasn't comfortable but wasn't explosive. When I stopped the car, she turned to me with something in her face that was difficult to read. Not quite remorse, not quite irritation. Something in between. I hear you, she said. I'll think about it. I nodded. She got out of the car. I drove home. She heard me, but she didn't receive it. She'll think about it, which is a way of shelving it without engaging with it. I've said what needed to be said. Now I watch what happens next. What happened next was almost a perfect demonstration of the original problem. The following 2 days, she was warmer than she'd been in weeks. She texted in the mornings, not much, just small things, a photo of a view from a site visit, a comment about something she'd heard on the radio that made her think of me. It felt like a response to the conversation, like something had been shaken loose and was settling in a better place. On the Thursday of that week, she called in the evening and we talked for an hour. Easy, honest, the kind of conversation that reminds you why you started something in the first place. I noted this too. I didn't take it as resolution. The Friday, I suggested we meet for coffee in the afternoon. She agreed. I got to the cafe first, a place called Allgate on the corner of Fell and Prescott, the kind of independent shop that had been there long enough to feel permanent. And I had my book open and my coffee in front of me when she came in. She sat down. She looked tired. Not the physical kind, the other kind where something is weighing on a person from the inside. Everything all right? I asked. Fine, she said. Just a long week. I nodded and let her settle. I asked about the Northgate project, which she'd been wrestling with for weeks due to some planning committee interference. She talked about it for a bit, but her engagement was thin, like she was narrating something she'd already resolved to stop caring about. And then, midway through her coffee, she looked at me and said, "You know you've been different this week." I held her gaze. Different how? I don't know. More distant. Like you're watching me. And there it is. I opened a door, and she didn't walk through it, and now the opening of the door is the problem. I thought about how to respond. Not about what to say to smooth things over. About what was actually true and necessary to say. I told you something important last week, I said. I described a pattern I've been experiencing. You said you'd think about it. I wasn't sure what that meant in terms of what comes next, so I've been giving things some space. It felt like withdrawal, she said. It was space, I said, which I offered because you'd told me before that closeness felt like too much. She looked at me. I said that once. You said it more than once, I said. And the week before that, you asked me to come over because you were missing me and needed me close. I'm not criticizing you for either. I'm telling you why it's difficult to calibrate. She set down her coffee. The look on her face was not anger exactly. It was something more complicated, something that looked from the outside like a person who'd been asked to look at something they'd been actively choosing not to see. I don't like feeling analyzed, she said. I'm not analyzing you, I said. I'm describing my own experience. It feels the same. This is the third time she's moved the conversation from what I said to how I'm saying it. That's not an engagement with the substance. That's an avoidance of it. Cassandra, I said, I came into this conversation and the one last week because I wanted to deal with something directly rather than let it erode things between us. That's a form of respect. I'm not coming at you with accusations. I'm telling you what it's like to be on my side of this relationship. She was quiet. And what I'm hearing from you, I continued, is that the act of describing my experience is itself the problem, which puts me in a position where saying nothing is too distant and saying something is too analytical. I don't know how to operate in that space. The silence that followed had weight. Then she said quietly, maybe I just need someone less structured. I sat with that for a moment. Structured. She means someone who will accept the shifting terms without naming them. Someone who will absorb the inconsistency without requiring it to be addressed. That's not a preference in a partner. That's a preference for someone who won't hold up a mirror. I don't think that's what you need, I said. But I hear that you're telling me something. We didn't end it that day. There were 2 more weeks, and I'm not going to pretend that was entirely on her because I am someone who prefers not to act until I'm clear, and I wanted to be clear. I wanted to make sure that what I was seeing was what I was seeing and not a story I'd assembled from incomplete data. What I saw in those 2 weeks confirmed it. The Saturday after the coffee conversation, she came over and we cooked dinner, and the evening was genuinely warm. She was present and funny and curious, and I thought, involuntarily, this is the version of this relationship that could work. We talked late into the night, and she fell asleep on my couch, and I covered her with the blanket from the armchair and sat for a while in the low lamplight thinking about what I actually wanted. I wanted this version. I was honest enough with myself to say that clearly. But the version I wanted wasn't the version I reliably had access to. The following Tuesday, I sent a simple text, something I'd sent dozens of times before, the kind of low-stakes message that means nothing except I'm thinking of you. I'd sent the same type of text on a dozen Tuesdays and received back the equivalent. This time she replied 3 hours later with a single line, I need some space right now. I looked at that message for a moment. Saturday, present, warm, fell asleep on my couch. Tuesday, needs space. No event, no conflict, no explanation. I set the phone down. I got up from my desk at Arrowwood, walked to the window, and looked out at the city for a moment. I didn't feel anger. I want to be accurate about that. I felt something quieter and more final, like a calculation that had been running in the background for weeks had just finished and returned its result. I can navigate complexity. I've spent my career doing it. I can navigate conflict, misalignment, honest disagreement, different needs that have to be negotiated into a workable shape. I can navigate a partner who is working through something difficult, or who needs more patience in one season than another, or whose emotional rhythms don't always match mine. What I can't navigate, what no one can navigate sustainably without losing themselves, is a relationship in which the rules change without notice, and the changing of rules can't be discussed because the discussion of them is itself a violation of a rule that didn't exist until this moment. That's not a relationship. That's a maze with movable walls. And I had been in it long enough to know that the walls weren't going to stop moving. I called her that evening. Not a text. I wanted to say what needed to be said with the appropriate directness. She picked up on the second ring. Hey, I said. I need to talk to you. A brief pause. Okay. I've thought carefully about us, I said. And I've been honest with you about what I've been experiencing, the inconsistency, the shifting responses, the eggshell feeling. I said it once, I said it again. And I've watched for any change in the pattern since. Silence. I'm not angry, I said, and meant it. I'm not telling you that you're a bad person or that your feelings are wrong or that you should be different than you are. But I can't sustain a relationship in which the same behavior produces opposite responses depending on something I can't see or predict, and in which naming that pattern is treated as the offense. Raymond, let me finish, I said calmly. I can't navigate a relationship where the rules change arbitrarily. I've tried. I've paid attention, and I've adapted, and I've been patient, and none of it has moved the underlying dynamic. This isn't working, Cassandra, and I think we both know it. The silence that followed was long enough that I checked the phone to make sure the call was still connected. So you're ending it, she said finally. Not a question. Yes, I said. Another pause. Then, because I have moods. She's still framing it that way. Even now, because the ground beneath this relationship isn't stable, I said, and I've learned enough over the past months to know that's not going to change. Moods are something different. This is something deeper than moods. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, you're very certain about this. I am, I said. And here's the thing. I want to be honest about this because it matters. There was a part of me in that moment that felt the pull of uncertainty. Not doubt about the decision, but the ordinary human discomfort of ending something with a person you genuinely cared about, a person who had real qualities worth caring about, a person who had made your life richer in specific and non-trivial ways. That pull was real, and I didn't dismiss it. But certainty and feeling pulled in two directions aren't opposites. You can be certain and still feel the cost of a decision. The certainty is about the logic. The pull is about the loss. I was certain, and I let myself feel the loss too, because denying it would have been dishonest. I'm sorry, I said, and meant that as well. I genuinely am. She said goodbye. I said goodbye. The call ended. I went for a run that night. Not at my usual time. It was well past 10 o'clock, but I needed the movement. The city at that hour is a different place, quieter, more itself, stripped of the performance of daytime. I ran the Hargrove Loop that takes me along the canal and up through the east side of Cartwright Reserve and back down along the old rail corridor that's been converted to a green path. I ran hard, not punishing myself, just moving with purpose, which is one of the few things that makes the body remember it has a logic of its own. I thought about what I'd learned. I think the central lesson wasn't about Cassandra specifically. It was about the difference between a problem that can be solved with better data or more patience, and a problem that is structural. Most difficulties in relationships are the first kind. They respond to honesty or to time or to both. The second kind doesn't respond to anything you do because it doesn't originate in anything you've done. You can be patient, you can be attuned, you can name the thing clearly and respectfully and give it room to be addressed, and none of it shifts the underlying structure. The trap, the real one, is the belief that if you were just smarter about it, or more careful, or found the right adjustment, the ground would become solid. That belief will keep a person in an unnavigable situation indefinitely, recalibrating, adapting, trying to find the key to a lock that reshapes itself every time you reach for it. I knew when I was watching myself do that. That awareness is not comfortable, but it's worth more than the comfort of not knowing. I came home at close to midnight, showered, made tea, and stood at my window for a long time looking out at the lights of Caldwell Heights in the dark. The valley the city sits in collects fog some nights, and this was one of them, a low layer that softened the lights of the lower neighborhoods and made the towers on the ridge look like they were floating. It's one of my favorite views in any city I've lived in. I've never taken it for granted. I thought about Run and Carter and the people in my life who I could count on for consistency. Not sameness, but the solid kind of constancy that comes from knowing someone's character well enough to predict it. I thought about my work, which I found genuinely absorbing and which gave me a clean and reliable feedback loop. I thought about the running and the cooking and the books on the east wall. I thought about what I wanted, not what I just ended, what I was oriented toward. The answer hadn't changed. I wanted something real and steady. I believed that was possible. I had believed it before Cassandra, and I believed it now. And the fact that this hadn't been it didn't make the belief naive. It just meant this hadn't been it. I finished the tea. I went to bed. I slept without difficulty, which told me something useful about the decision. 3 weeks later, I ran into Owen Marsh at a coffee shop near the Arrowwood offices. We stood outside in the April light and talked for a few minutes. He asked about Cassandra. I told him, simply, that we'd ended things. He nodded with the look of a man who already suspected as much. "I'm sorry," he said. "She seemed like she had a lot going for her." "She did," I said. "She does. What happened, if you don't mind?" I thought about how to answer that honestly without being reductive about it. "The relationship didn't have consistent enough ground," I said. "I couldn't get traction." He thought about that. "That's a hard thing to deal with." "It is," I said, "but you deal with it by dealing with it, not by pretending the ground is solid when it isn't." He nodded. "Are you all right?" "Yes," I said, and meant it without qualification. "I'm good." We parted ways, and I walked back toward the office along Prescott Street, past Allgate where I'd had the coffee with Cassandra that had told me what I needed to know, past the small bookshop that I'd been intending to go into for months and kept not finding the time for. I stopped and went in. I spent half an hour in there, which I hadn't expected. I came out with 2 books, which was also not unexpected once I'd started looking. I walked back to Arrowwood and settled into work, and the morning passed the way good mornings do when you're oriented towards something you actually understand. That's all it is in the end. Not arrival, just orientation, knowing the direction you're moving in, and being clear-eyed enough about where you are to adjust your course when the ground starts to shift. I know how to do that. I've always known how to do that. The question is only whether you trust the knowing enough to act on it. I do.
Thanks for listening.